Hello, I am Carly Bonar, and we are talking today about cannabis on Uncommon Conversations. So I wanted to start a little bit talking about why I wanted to come in and do Uncommon Conversations. I am a person who really strives for conscious living. I am a plant medicine practitioner, and I wanted a space where we could share story, and I might be able to share story with other plant medicine practitioners, people living conscious lives. Um, and through the storytelling, oftentimes the medicine or our own practices seem to integrate into the body. And this is something I noticed through integration calls. And this is kind of one of those places where it was like, I want to be able to talk about the deep things that come up, um, the uncommon things that come up as we go through the integration process and we're moving through life. And as well, I am familiar with, integration sometimes from one journey can take years. And through my own practice and in my own life, I have experienced this time and time again, where storytelling helps me to remember something that I had forgotten. So that's why I'm here. Um, so I wanted to talk about cannabis as an ally plant. And my own practice with cannabis has been rich over the years. I have also fallen into habitual use, and the plant reminds me when that happens that it's time for a break. This is misuse. I listen deeply for those callings, and I only sit with this plant when I hear the calling. And that's how I've uh, adopted a more purposeful practice and right relationship with the plant. So the first thing I wanted to talk about, because I want to share with other people what this practice is and how to be in right relationship with this plant. Um, Before we talk about that part, I wanted to talk about a little bit, what does it mean to operate with dignity and respect for a plant and for ourselves when it comes to these practices. Right now, out in the world, what I see on a daily basis, in particularly where I get sensitive about this, is in larger cities. I'm going out into a larger city and all you smell is the plant. And it's not that the smell bothers me at all. Where it hits me is, what are the intentions? What are people um, doing out there, and why is it why is this smell permeating our cities? And um, where it hits me and where it goes in my mind is, if this practice is unconscious, um, then really what's the difference, uh, you know, between drinking alcohol and or any of the other misuse out there with drugs and alcohol? Um, how is this effective? How are people operating effectively is what I want to say. And um, yeah, I'll start with that. And I wanted to ask you, Sophie, is this something that you're experiencing where you live? Are you sensitive to this? Does this make sense for you? And you can say a little bit too about your practice with cannabis, if you have one, or how you're feeling in general first before maybe touching on that.
Thanks so much. Yeah, great introduction. Do you want me to introduce myself a little bit as well?
Sure, yeah, that'd be great.
Okay. Hello. My name is Sophie Campisi. I am the founder of Ren Wellbeing, a wellness platform that brings together practitioners and modalities from all over the world to support human beings really in what it is to be human, all of the different things across all domains. And really, my why for doing this is really about workability and effectiveness. One thing that I saw through my life's journey and also studying human rights, formally in law school, and then just informally and what I was choosing to engage with and work was, what we all have in common is we're all human, but not that just like we're all actually trying to figure out life. Like we're all, and I don't like to say this to have it feel like, simplified or dumbed down, like playing this game of life. Like that is something that all 8+ billion people on this world are doing every single day they wake up, is they're trying to get through the day, you know, in different ways that we could articulate that. I hope that you'll kind of get what I'm saying. And for me, the name of the game is all about effectiveness. How can we as humans have more tools to be more effective at whatever result we're seeking to produce? How can we be in action in a way that's opening possibility and supporting our evolution? And guess what? We don't choose whether we're evolving or not. It is inherent in being human. We're born at 0 years old and we die sometime later. Um, it is part of it is at the core of being human is evolution progression. There is no experience of life that is not progressing. So how can we have more support and more tools to do that effectively? Again, what is the result we're trying to produce, and how can we be more effective at producing that result? In my assessment, a lot of the suffering of human beings is actually coming from not having the competency to produce whatever results we're seeking to produce across all areas of life. So it really comes down to more support, more tools. So that's my why. That's why I'm here. That's why Ren exists. That's why I care about having these conversations. And so that guides me in specifically to plant medicine. I also am a plant medicine practitioner. Um, I have been trained to work with um, uh, indigenous ways of working with plants, and then also some psychedelics. And um, I care about it because it can be a really effective tool. Um, what I want to see more is the point of one of the main points of this call that I'm having today with Carly, more, we might say responsible use or more effective use. Really, I mean, it's really about effectiveness, right? There's no right or wrong. It's really effective. Is it effective at producing the results someone's seeking to produce? And I think that these conversations just aren't being talked about as much. And like you're saying, and I love Carly how you said, is it conscious use? Like, what does that mean? And why does that matter? My take on it is it matters for all the stuff I just said. Are we using it as a tool to be more effective at what we're seeking to produce in life across all areas, not one area, right? And we can dive more in, Carly, if that opens up some space for conversations. And so personally, I don't use cannabis. I have in the past, before I had more tools, early 20s, like late teens, early 20s. Um, but it was never a big thing in my life personally. And I don't use cannabis to this day. It's very intense for me. It's not chill. As I like to tell people, it's like super not chill for me. So if I were to engage with it, it would be a very big choice for me. And there are different plants that actually are more effective for me to usually produce a result I would be seeking to produce. Um, I'm going to leave it at that. Is there anything, Carly, that I missed or that you want me to explain before we keep going?
No, I love what you said. Something I wanted to say in addition to that is I think of plants as soul family. You know, they're here to help us remember the oneness of who we are on this planet and the interconnectedness of the wisdom that we share. And one of the things that to bring it back around to the question that I had about, you know, how is this really effective when we're going into cities and everybody is smoking on the street and you know, and I see it and there's no judgment here. I'm curious about how people are moving through their life, you know, as I see moms pushing babies in strollers, hitting the vape, or however you want to say that, because there are many things I see in the city, and I'm thinking, you know, I'm curious, like, okay, so if that's happening, how is a person then present? Because like you said, you know, for you, you're sensitive to this plant. I'm also very sensitive to this plant. When I practice with the plant, it's, I don't need a lot, you know, and it takes me into a meditative state, a state of contemplation, of spiritual contemplation. And I'm sitting and writing down my curiosities or writing down the wisdom from the plant, and then in hopes to share that. So I'm curious about how people are able to function and be effective in everyday life um, with such misuse is what I would call that. So it's a curiosity of mine for sure. And when it becomes habitual instead of ritual, then it's, you know, you could say, I could say, or I could assess that it's not right relationship. And so I wanted to go into a little bit of what the wisdom coming through from the plant. And when my channel is activated, it oftentimes comes in the form of poetry. And I wrote some things down that the plant had shared with me. And this is for me in particular. So this is not going to be for everybody, but I did find some things um, more of like purposeful practice or practical wisdom that came from the plant about what the plant wants us to know. And so here, I'll just read. Cannabis is a divine teacher of the earth. She helps us to remember the oneness of the planet. An ally in the art of letting go, she helps me to see so I have the opportunity to change that part of me. That's all we can ever do to keep ourselves true and walk with the rightness instead of the righteous. And when we forget, because we do, we're still human, it's true. And we forget that too. Cannabis can show us how to stay authentic. When we are in rightful practice, we can remember our birthright to be here, to remember the joy we get to see when we look at mediocrity so we can do better. And so where that hit me when I heard that come through was, you know, I'm always listening to when it's time to sit. It's not I should say it's not really a thought in my day. So when I go to my altar, I have many practices, many tools for my well-being, and I check in every morning. What is it going to be today? Cannabis comes through maybe once a month. And this is not something that I will share, you know, this is not something that has always been, because I have fallen into misuse myself. And what that looks like, so just to be clear, what misuse looks like for me is I am checked out. I'm not present for my kids, which is what led me to the comment about like the mom in the stroller, like how is she doing it? How, because I can't. So when I have gotten high, and that's what I'll call it, when I've gotten high in the past, um, I can't be present. I'm somewhere else. I'm often receiving some kind of poetry. I'm feeling something in my body that's taking me right out of where I should, well, there is no should, but you know, I'll use air quotes here, where I should be in the moment. Be where your hands are is something I tell myself a lot. So it's, if I can't be where my hands are, if I can't be where my kids are, if I can't be tuned into what I'm doing to make my life effective, um, you know, then what does it mean? It means that I was getting high. That's the way that I keep myself pure with this practice. And so going into purposeful practice from there, because that's what I'm really talking about, is that it allows me to see the way that I am in captivity in my own mind and helps me to set myself free and remember who I am, let go of programming. And for me as a sensitive person, this is how, so I'll start by saying since I've started the practice of plant medicine, I have become more sensitive. My sensitivities are heightened. I'm able to see through the veil, and oftentimes going out into the world, I'm putting on armor, I'm putting on protection so that I can be effective in my life, because the world right now to me can look painful. All of its beauty and all of its joy that I choose to see, I also see the pain. And so for that, I put on some armor. And so when I am called to sit with this plant, when I hear the calling, it's because I've built up so much armor that I can't feel my own heart. That often happens. It's like by the end of a month, I feel this hardening. And to tune back into myself, I will hear a plant call my name. It's not always cannabis, but this is what it means to be a practitioner and operate in, as we say, right medicine, is waiting for that call. And so, yeah, I think being present also means tuning in and listening for right timing. And so, purposeful practice is that it's like saying right timing, or what am I tuning into? What am I listening into? And Sophie, since you also have experience with this, I'll ask you, is this something, I know cannabis is not your plant, but in the past, or in the plants that you do sit with, is this the way that you operate with that as a practitioner? Are you listening for the call? Or when the call comes, how do you follow?
I would be, I'm curious if I'd like to explain maybe my take on where you started with, which is like, what do I experience as misuse, or like, how do I see it showing up? Because I see it showing up
Yeah.
so much. It's, I like to word, I've also studied a lot I've done a lot of formal study on what a lot of people call addiction,
Mhm.
different types of addiction. Of course, if you've been in this world or studied it, they typically run together. Um, and where I'm coming from in my background is always fundamental. Okay, what is fundamental to this, right? This is like a label, but what is fundamental? And as I was like noodling about this for years, this is something that really I've been really curious about. For those of you that are into human design, or familiar, I'm not an expert. I know a lot about my own chart. I have the full gate of addiction. So I am susceptible to addiction, but it's also very easy for me to come out of it. A lot of people will have one or the other, but I have both parts. And so I have been told in the past that part of what I might be here to do is to study this and learn how can I support people and teach people. And so I'm also a projector. And so it's like I've thought about this a lot, because in my past where I was, let me see how to describe what this is like. Short-sighted is like when I thought that everyone experienced things like I did, right? Like when we don't understand that, like we go about the world one way, not everyone does. I would be really confused. Why can't someone just stop doing it? Like if it's
Mhm.
obviously harmful, like why don't they just stop? It wasn't until close to 30 that I learned this thing of my chart, and it made so much sense. I was like, oh yeah, because in the past, people are like, I remember specifically having a conversation with a heroin addict, and I was probably early 20s, maybe getting close to mid 20s, just talking to this person. And this person was like, "Are you an addict? Like, all these things." And I was like, that was the first time I was like, oh shit, am I an addict? I was like, how do I know all these things? And then I just looked because I was going fundamental. I was like, I didn't associate with being an addict. So some of the words that I use to describe misuse is, I think, extremism, someone that has the ability to be extreme, and then substance dependence are kind of two that I use to like play around with this instead of using that word addict. Although to be simple and clear, sometimes it's necessary, but I do think that it's very heavy. So I tend to use misuse, extremism, substance dependence to kind of like, look at what is fundamental to what's going on that would bring about misuse. So that's kind of also like some of my background. Um, I have this full gate of addiction, and it's really, really fascinating. So it gives me, as I've become into more of my duty and responsibility and not making anyone wrong, I'm really curious with it. And so I see that I tend to be very surrounded with people who might be labeled as addicts. I'm
Mhm.
always just like, what's going on here? Because I'm curious. I think that there's something that I can bring forth in the world at some point in my life to like support what's going on here. So what I would say I see the most, I'll say what I see the most, and then also what is annoying to me and my ego about it that I hear a lot. But uh I see substance dependence a lot, right? So just with anything, so specifically with cannabis, substance dependence is substance dependence. It doesn't matter what it is, right? So neutrally caffeine, right? We all know substance dependence, any substance that has the um, I don't know if this is the correct word, like predisposition to be structurally coupled with our biology in a way that we need this thing, right? Our biology gets coupled with this thing to need it to kind of operate and stay at a base level. Um, uh, Cannabis is one of those things. And so um, going to your question, how do people operate in this way? Well, probably because they have become so dependent, like their baseline, just like someone would say they're a functioning alcoholic, right? Well, that is also what I see all of the time. I mean, there are people in my life who smoke weed from the moment they wake up to the time they go to bed. And I think that all the time, right? I'm like, holy smokes. But there's a substance dependence going on that like changes biology, how someone can work and be with the day. And yes, they can function, but are they really present? I like to use the term functioning alcoholic because people get that more.
Yeah.
Um, so I'll throw in like where I get like in my crap about it, or what like, simplistically annoys me or whatever when I hear is like I I kind of like using this word or phrase spiritual bypass, like in communities where people say like, oh, it's medicine, um, overlooking the use or the misuse. And then
Right, where cannabis is non-addictive. I hear that a lot too. It's not the
exactly.
cannabis, it's the habit. Yeah.
It's the habit, and it changes everything, right? And it is when you're substance dependent, you are substance dependent.
Right.
It will bookend your whole life, right? It will be everywhere present. If you try not to smoke for a certain amount of time, it is bookended by the time you smoke. It's like these are some of the ways that we can see how is it showing up. So people like, oh yeah, it's medicine. And then like I need it. I have heard people say I need it instead of XYZ, right?
Mhm.
I'm using it because I'm not using um, an antidepressant or a mood stabilizer or this or that. And so, I mean, more on that if we want to dive into specifics, but my quick sum of that is I think it can be a great tool.
Right.
But anytime we're using something consistently through long term with no container or no, with maybe the exception of terminal illness, and of course there are some things, we have to be very careful that there's misuse going on. Very, very, very careful. So those are like my background, and also like where my crop is when um yeah, like you said, people say, oh, it's not addictive, oh, it's
Right.
medicine. You can't, people are in denial that it can be misused, and that's untrue. You know, it's ungrounded. It can, just like anything. If someone woke up and drank a beer as soon as they woke up, people would be like, whoa, what's going on? You know, are you okay? But for some reason, people can wake up and smoke a bowl and people are less, I don't know, like not noticing it as much, like, or not saying like, whoa, are you okay? When really it's like, can we use some of these things to be like, hey, are you okay? Um, Fabulous tool, just like anything, and it can be misused for sure. So I kind of like gave more background. So I don't know if that opens anything up for
No,
you
it
that you
does.
dive into.
As soon as you started talking about, well, first of all, I wonder if we share this in human design. I don't know specifically, but I remember you and I having a conversation about, who do I work with? And I was very specific. It's like, who's being called to me right now? Specifically men in active addiction who are having trouble and breakdown in their relationships and want help. And including my family members, including friends, including, a lot of people. So I'm curious about that. And also what you mentioned, it's like the root of what I think the misuse comes from is pain. Obviously, we're out in the world and we are experiencing pain. Nobody said life would be easy here. And we have tools to help us, but oftentimes those things become habits. And you see it with retail therapy. I mean, it happens. It doesn't have to be cannabis or alcohol or, drugs and alcohol. But, you know, when I was sitting with the plant last week, which it had been a month. Like I said, it's become like a monthly thing. I go in with purpose, and the plant was sharing with me this idea of pain, and the plant showed me um, very quickly how it goes from creativity to this. It's sort of this like art of letting go. It's so beautiful when I sit and practice with it. So what it looks like is the plant shows me what has been painful to me that causes this block, that causes me to put up this protection, to almost want to go into misuse of something. So the plant shows me where the pain comes from. Interestingly, the other day, I'll share my experience was right away, creativity came up and play. So what happened was I was speaking and I was recording myself because for me, the creative flow happens with poetry. And so I just hit record. I allowed the beatnik in me to start coming out and flowing. And it was about the pain that I was experiencing in the world. And then it moved into, oh, I can remember how to play. And you hear me take a breath and go into this. I felt it in my heart just crack open and the tears coming down, and oh my God, I can play, I can play, I can play. And I often get this message in plant medicine where I get too serious. This is my not self in human design. I'm a projector. My not self is bitter. And I'm not often a bitter person. If you know me in the world, I'm usually pretty happy. But whenever I go and see what's going on out there, I can become like bitter and turned off. And so this is what the plant was showing me, is like this, you can go in, find like this origination or this root of your pain, wherever that exists, by asking your body, where am I holding on to pain? Where is the pain coming from? And then allowing yourself to surrender to the plant and tune in and listen to, where is that in my body? And what is that associated with? What is it bringing up for me? When it's used in this way, and so I've been dabbling in sitting with other people that sit with the plant. When it's used in this way, it's highly effective because you are letting go, almost like we see in deep medicine spaces, with other plants. A very light dose of cannabis is very powerful and can take you into letting go of where that root of the pain is, letting it come out, naming it, and then finding a way. The effective part for me is by tapping into the creativity. so that, we process it fully. So it's like, you identify where the pain comes from, you move into really feeling that. And what does that mean? And how do you let that go? And then through the creative process, you can let it go. So whether someone's painting or writing poetry or however this might come up, this plant seems to really be an ally for that. And a lot of artists I know really love this plant. So just naming that really helped me to put it into a different perspective, so that it's like, it's not about smoking and getting high and then, that's the only way I can paint, or that's the only way I can write or sing. It's more like when I'm blocked and I can't feel that part of me, when I'm not able to create, when I'm not able to find my flow, is it possible that cannabis is an ally for this and can be sat with in order to help us remember how to get there? And the answer for me is yes. But the art of hearing the call is one of those things that really needs to be, I think, talked about more and shared about. And that's, essentially what I'm doing here today. So is there anything you want to say about that?
Yeah, I think yes to everything that you said. I think that, yeah, misuse versus use, and maybe apparently how I'm kind of showing up in this conversation is what are maybe some of the signs. It probably part of the art of hearing the call is also being able to recognize misuse, or maybe it's not talked about enough, maybe not in your community, or maybe uh, we tend to see things being misused, no matter what it is, substance or not substance, where there's not a lot of distinctions, right? Sex, for instance,
Mhm.
sex, when I reflect on my childhood, I grew up Roman Catholic. Um, I wasn't necessarily being told you're going to hell if you have sex. I think Catholics kind of have this funny thing. It's just like, don't ask, don't tell.
Mm.
And where I see that so much harm, I was in such a harmful relationship at times, like I found myself in getting harmed in that domain. It's because it wasn't talked about. If I would have been taught more, if it was talked about more, I could have learned how to say no, right? I didn't know because my biology is telling me, oh, everything's okay. I need to contort and be permissive, all these things, right? So that's what I see also with this. Not that anything's wrong or anyone's doing anything wrong, but I think it's definitely a space where we're not often shown different ways of using it, right? It's not often talked about, so we don't have these things. Again, some of these taboo areas, I'm such a proponent of talking about things in a very, effective, neutral way, because these taboo areas where there's not conversation, that is where so much havoc is
Yeah.
wreaking havoc, if that's how it goes. So it's like sex or some of these areas where people aren't talking about it. I see, well, what do we have to go to? How do we see different ways? There are many ways to be with cannabis in ways that would be effective, because there won't ever be one size fits all. If we're showing up to be in right relationship, to be in responsible use, that will even ebb and flow for a single person through time, because there is no right thing. So how can we bring conversations forward and show different ways of like, what might that look like? With that, also, what might it look like to be in misuse? Of course, we're just having this conversation, but I think some of these things could be fleshed out in a way that it could give people some pointers and some guides. Because I think, what I look at when I think of misuse, substance dependence, of course, there's a lot out there that research can be done. Like, what are some things? There's like checklists
Mhm.
that are used. You can find a lot about cannabis as well, specifically because, again, people think it's not addictive. There's a huge it's ungrounded. Cannabis, especially today, it's very potent, especially if you're smoking wax. Anything that is like wax based, very high. There's a lot of, um, especially adolescent psychosis and stuff that goes on from use young. So you can do some research. It is very easy to find some things, but I'm going to add to some of those conversations. What is, how can we gauge things like harm?
Mhm.
harm that's being caused. Like, I think if we're wondering, oh, am I in proper relationship? Am I misusing? Maybe a question that could be asked is like, harm, is there harm being caused? How much harm and where? So some areas to look. If you've studied with me before, you've taken the fundamentals, uh, or you've heard of the 15 domains through other bodies of work, you can start there, like where harm might be getting caused. You mentioned, Carly, some people that you work with, relationships, right? So is there
Mhm.
being harm caused to relationships, to health, work, right? It can interfere with work, family, if you're not showing up for your kids or you're not engaging, sociability. If you're choosing to stay home and be with cannabis, that might keep you from going out and uh, dating, right? Or getting on the court with social things, right? So these are just some examples. Is there harm being caused? Gauging harm versus like what it's opening up versus harm caused. Um, because this is something that sneaks up when it comes to misuse. We'll see one area that it's working, and then that trumps everything else. And we let that be, right? So I see a lot of artists like, but it's so good for my creativity. Totally. But you're letting that trump all the other domains in the
Right.
areas that it is causing harm because you see this one area where it's working. And that's just a way that these things can kind of sneak. So that's some of the things that I would look for. Harm being caused. What is harm? How we say it's not just like, oh, ouch, my arm hurts. It's like, um, if there's breakdown in some way, shape, or form, this is how we could assess harm. If it's closing possibility, if it's causing problems, things like that. That's like what we mean by harm. And then when it comes to being a tool, um, so those are my first two. Substance dependence, that's easy. There's information about that. Harm being caused, making your own personal assessments about harm being caused. And then as a tool, right, there are times when it can be an effective tool. And something that I like to suggest to people or give them, yeah, I guess suggest is an okay word for what I'm meaning, is in moments where we might be going to this tool, take a pause and say, is there a more effective tool in this moment? And to make a quick assessment, because I'll see people, if it's a go-to for stress,
Mhm.
if you're going too quick to cannabis without taking that pause, they can miss something, right? Is it more effective actually to go for a walk, go for a bike ride, go play
Right.
basketball, right? Like what else could be? And that's when we can start kind of creating some space to see like, is it the most effective tool right now?
Right.
And then make that assessment. What other tools do I have? And then you can start pattern recognition is really important. And sometimes, I think that's I hear that sometimes and I'm like, oh, what do they mean? But I see now in my own speaking that sometimes people understand what that is. And you can start kind of recognizing patterns. I would suggest to people to try to create space in the times that they're using that might then, and then we can shift now and kind of focus in on what would a proper relationship we be, what would an effective use of cannabis look like? You've given an example.
Right.
Um, of
And
how you do it.
I wanted to say, add one thing to for checking in, everybody has different tools. I I'm happy to have kinesiology. So when I'm checking in about something, whether it's right for me, I'm asking my body. I use simple, you know, cannabis is right for me today, and hold strong. If it holds strong, fine. If not, that, and there are all kinds of tools for checking in, but checking into the body and asking your body, is it cannabis today? Is it a walk? Is it, a nap? A lot of times, like, all we need is rest, and we're going straight to like something else because we don't want to rest because we're so programmed to keep producing. And so this, I think, pertains to the artists that you were speaking about. I know a lot of people that are like, well, I have to get these paintings done. I have to do this thing. I have to. Well, maybe if you just take a nap, you might see that there something beautiful comes tomorrow, you know. So I wanted to touch on that.
Totally. Yeah. One thing I want to add, and then I do, yeah, like I love the way you're guiding with getting to the like, you know, proper uses. if it's scheduled, just kind of also like notice that. You know, I do know some people that are like, um, Friday rolls around at a certain time and they're on it because that's when they can or get to, right? So if it's scheduled, just keep an eye on it. But it's not to say that that's not effective, because I would say if someone's, for instance, going from using it every day and then is now cutting down to the weekends, that could be a really, really effective thing, right?
Mm.
So it's not, again, one size fits all. It never will be, as much as it would be great. It's not. So it's not to say that someone that's only using cannabis on the weekends is not in right relationship fully, or that that's not effective use if where they were 6 months ago was 7 days a week, 365
Right.
days a
And if they're
year.
getting, if they're exploring and getting the way the plant talks to me is, it's really here for us to play and to be able to explore and all of that. And so if a person is actively participating and in right relationship with this plant, and they know, hey, this weekend I get to play with cannabis. How fun is that? We're going to create together. We're going to laugh. We're going to bring joy to our lives. It is still purposeful. There's still intention there. So I agree with you. Scheduled time is not, you schedule time to go on dates, right? You schedule time to go shopping. You schedule time to do. So that's more intention than just picking up mindlessly whatever you're smoking or however you're using that day. That's different. That's very different. So I like what you said about that. Yeah.
Really, I was going to talk about dignity because, maybe this is like something that could be helpful for this conversation before we talk about,
Yeah,
yeah,
I
like,
think that was my first question. What does it
yeah,
mean to operate with dignity with this
dignity.
plant? Yeah. Hmm.
I'm going to like bring in some distinctions about dignity, but really I'm going to put it back to you because you have a more personal relationship with the plant, and just said some things that reminded me of this. So, like when my background in law, when I was in law school, I studied human rights law and asylum law. And in my legal classes that were having to do with human rights, the first day of class is always like you're building the foundation. And sometimes you don't understand that you're doing that until you're studying for the exam at the end. How, uh, yeah, at least me, maybe everyone gets it. I always seem to take a long time to get there. Human dignity was always talked about, dignity, 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 dignity. And it wasn't actually until I studied ontology that I actually understood what dignity meant in an operational way. So I'm going to give some distinctions around human dignity, and then I would like to explore that and bring that back to you, Carly. We say that when we treat humans as objects, there is a loss of dignity, right? So that would be human dignity in this context. Dignity, human dignity. When we're treating humans like objects, including ourselves, there is a loss of dignity. And we do this to ourselves and other people all day long, every day. That is that feeling. If you ever feel like that, like hit in the chest, or, it's usually because there's a loss of dignity. And again, we do it to ourselves, we do it to others in big ways and small ways all the time. We don't realize it. So what does it mean to be the opposite of that is like treating human beings as human beings is how we can show up and be a dignitary. You can be a dignitary in your own lives, in your own homes, in your own communities, in your relationships, partnerships, friendships. You can be a dignitary by having that at the forefront. When we treat human beings like human beings and not like objects, not like they're going to show up the same way every day, not like there's something for us to use, like a car or a pencil or whatever. We are restoring dignity into the space. And I've studied this a lot as it relates to human dignity, but I've not thought about it as plant. And it was like, yeah, one of the first things that you said. So I would love to hear your thoughts, and maybe there's questions for the plants, or maybe there's something you've talked to. Like, what does that look like for being with a plant? It is a thing, like, so when I think about that, so it's like, what is that? What is the plant asking for when it's asking to be treated with dignity? What are some of those things where that we're looking for, that it wants to be honored and acknowledged more than just something to be used and consumed. Like, what is there that is stepping through when it comes to like what that looks like?
Yeah, thank you for bringing it back to this. I'm getting choked up thinking about it because this was one of my first questions for a reason, part of why I'm here is to restore the dignity between humans and animals. I work with animals and plants. And back long ago, I worked with people who could not speak, people with autism or special needs that, didn't have a speaking voice. And I'm often called to that work. And so during this time when I was sitting with the plant recently, and one of the things that really brought me to want to be on this call was the loss of dignity for the plant itself. And excuse me if I end up in tears because the message that came through. So the plant was, first of all, I understand that the plant also has a soul, and so uh, the way that the plants and cannabis, I'll just say cannabis in particular, had asked to be called a being and not a thing, right? So it has a soul. And the plant was sharing with me that its soul hurts when we're in misuse. The soul of the plant is hurt when it's harvested in a way that there's not intention, or brought up in a way that is designed for misuse. And the plant had said to me, so it's so deep, um, you know, how would you feel if you were on Earth and no one encouraged you to live up to your full potential? And these plants have such deep wisdom for us. They have such universal messages for us, such rich, rich messages. And when we are not operating in a way that allows them dignity, they feel it. They feel it. And I'm curious around, just like I am with animals. So um, being an esthetician, a lot of times I would notice people, breaking out and having cystic acne when they were drinking milk, right? And a lot of emotional disruption. And I would link it automatically to like, oh, well, there's a lot of mistreatment of mother cows and their young. And how does this affect the milk that people are drinking, right? It's the same with the plants, how are these plants being treated as they're being grown and harvested? And, what does that mean for our ingestion? Like, what does it mean when we take in that? And how can, if so personally, I will share that I like to sit with plants that are grown lovingly, that are being sung to, that are loved and nurtured from the time that they're seeds, because and set with intention that this is going to be more of a practice of ritual or a ceremonial practice. And so for me, this is how I choose to be in right relationship and restore the dignity of the plants. But this is definitely something that the plants are talking to me a lot about, and with a lot of heart, and it hits my heart in a way that I really want to talk about it. So yeah, yeah. I don't know if that hits you anywhere. The other thing that I'll add in addition to that is that, you know, since the plants are feeling sort of this deep pain of misuse and what they've communicated to me, then the curiosity leads me to, is this a fractured relationship? Like, how do we bring this back? Not just me, I can do my part, but what I want to talk about is like, how do we restore that and make it more whole, bring it back to this holistic practice, and um, yeah, and mend the fractures.
It's a great question. And I think that, the first thing that jumps to me, one thing is like, mm, and this is just, I guess, how I think in general. And also here we have Ren, which is an example of that. I'm like, there's not a right or wrong for how many tools someone has or uses, but maybe to check your minimum. How many tools do you have in your toolbox, right? When it comes to stress, when it comes to the times in your life and the areas in your life that you're in breakdown, meaning stuff isn't working, you're stressed, you're overwhelmed. How many tools do you have in your toolbox? Can we look at it that way? Because I tend to really go there, especially when I'm working with people who have addictions, not so much focus on the thing, open up your life, your world, focus on other things, put other things in the spaces. And so that's something that came to mind when you said that is let it have friends and partners in supporting you. Like, don't let it be alone in a toolbox. It doesn't want to, at least that's how it feels to me. So part of how to mend some of the fractures would be give it support in your life, or, if that makes sense, like let it be a tool amongst many that you use to support you in your life, in your ups and downs, in the joyous parts, like you brought up play, and also in the stressful parts, right? Sometimes it might be just like, yes, a great tool if it's been crazy week or whatever. But let it not be the only tool, right? Have other things. So that came to mind. I don't know if that lands, but that's
No,
to
it
me what
definitely
something
does.
I feel.
Yeah, definitely. And as you're saying that, it's like, and where, because the other part of it is, plants are found in nature, right? So could it mean you're sitting with the plant and you're walking, or you're sitting with the plant and you're outside and you're, watching birds fly in the sky, however it is in its most natural state for effectively de-stressing, it can be partnered and paired. So I love what you're saying, because we are partners to the plant while we're sitting with it. And also in addition to that, what are some other partners that want to come along for that journey, and so that we can all be sort of in right relationship with each other.
Something that comes to mind for me about that is like, yeah, it doesn't have to be TV, movies, and scrolling. I see that happen so often, but not always. And sometimes it's healthy. Sometimes we need it. Sometimes we need to go offline.
Mhm.
And that, again, there's not a right or wrong, because sometimes that's valuable and effective for the result trying to produce. But, there's just other ways. There's other ways to be with it. Uh, yeah. Um, yeah, that's all that's coming to me right now.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for sharing. And I wanted to share something else about the practical wisdom that was coming through, and just more about my own practice. That way, if it gives anybody sort of an idea about how I'm in right relationship, and I can only assess myself, and I'm not judging anyone else for their use or misuse. Um, but when I do feel the calling from the plant, I often I set a space, I set the altar space. I'm calling in my guides, my healed and well ancestors, to be with me during this time, for communion, for, really sitting with and receiving from the plant, and being with the plant. And so I clear the space as well, clear myself, setting intentions, making agreements with the plant. That's something I do. Like, what is the purpose for this today? And do you want to be with me today? I listen, do you want to go on this journey with me of whatever it might be? And then leaning into and surrendering completely and allowing the plant to show me. That's the other part of it is, show me, show me. I don't know better. I'm learning from the plant. If I'm going to sit with the plant, I'm going to learn from it. I don't know better. So that was a little bit of practical wisdom that I wanted to share, in addition to everything that we talked about. Hmm. But I think we can probably wrap up this conversation unless there's anything else that you have to add.
No, I feel complete. I think this is something like that's a big topic. Like I mentioned, I have this like whole addiction gate thing. And so I'm so curious about this. I hope that I continue to be in conversations like this one where I can continue to learn and hopefully continue to bring valuable distinctions and helpful things in a space that um, historically was maybe taboo or thought about in one way. And we're seeing there are so many nuances, and there's um, it's causing some problems. And I think, as it gets more socially acceptable, I think that conversations like this are going to be more and more important.
Yes,
Because just because something's legal doesn't mean that it can't be misused, right?
right,
Um,
exactly.
and mm, yeah,
And these are other beings that we're working with. It's not, it's not a man-made substance. And so that's where I go with it. Like how can I be in service to these loving beings that have been in service to me? How can I give back? How can I be in reciprocity, reciprocal relationship? And so thank you for having this conversation with me. I appreciate you.
yeah. Thank you for having me.